Welcome back, everybody. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both books published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 favorite horror writers of all time. These are the top 10 greatest horror writers ever, in my opinion. Now, if your opinion differs from mine after watching my list, because a lot of you are going to think my list is a complete shit show, and that's all right. You can comment in the commenty part of the video, and you can tell me your opinions, and, we'll discuss. There are no right or wrong answers on this show. However, my opinions are mostly right. So let's get to it. My top 10 favorite horror writers of all time. And coming in at number 11, you knew I wasn't going to keep it to 10. I just had to throw this guy in there because he is my 11th favorite. I couldn't leave him off the list. And that is Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. I think he's great. Great enough to almost make my top 10, but not quite that great. But anyway, Joe Hill, following in the footsteps of his father, I'm going to be holding up, just so you know, for every author in my list, I will be holding up 2 of their books, and only 2 of their books. I'm not going to show you all of their books, because I do have all of their books in my vast library. So just so I've got every book. So if I show you one of these writers, rest assured I've got every horror novel they have written in my collection. But anyway, so we start off in grand high fashion with Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. If you've read his work, you know it's dope. Let's get to the top 10 now. Okay, now this is a brand new horror writer. He is one of my most favorite new horror writers. He's only got a handful of horror books to his name, but that is Stephen Graham Jones. And if you've read The Only Good Indians or My Heart is a Chainsaw, you know this guy is the next big thing in horror. He's a bestseller already. His books are just absolutely engrossing. They've got all the great things about horror that we love, and you can tell when you read his books that he's having fun writing his books, and that he also loves the horror genre. Horror movies, horror novels. This guy is steeped in horror lore from the 70s. This guy if you've read this My Heart is a Chainsaw, you know what I'm talking about. He knows his horror genre, and he loves his horror genre. And he infuses all of that stuff into his novels. Number 9. I'm going to go with my main man, Jonathan Maberry. I love Jonathan Maberry. I have met Jonathan Maberry. He's one of the people that I've met on the list. I've met a few people on this list, actually. Being an author myself, I sometimes go to book signings and I end up at a table next to other authors signing books. Jonathan Maberry is one of the guys that I've met. And he did, of course, sign all of his books to me. I like the guy. I've sat on panels with him at Comic-Cons. He's great. But his Ghost Road Blues series is my favorite series of his. So I'm holding up the first 2 books in that trilogy. Jonathan Maberry, great. He also does the Joe Ledger Zombie Hunter series, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now let's get to number... I can't remember where we're at. I'm not good at math. We're at 7 or 8. But anyway, that is... I think it's 1, 2, 3... Where the fuck am I in this list? This is number 8. 9. No, I don't know. 7, 8, or 9. Brian Lumley. Necroscope. Love the Vampire Necroscope series. So, got to include those. I think everybody would agree that these belong on anyone's top 10 horror writers list. Brian Lumley. Let's get to number 7. 7, I think. My mainest man, Dean Koontz. I like this guy. I got every Dean Koontz novel. All of them. All of them. I love this guy. Dean Koontz, he is a thriller writer's horror writer, if that makes sense. I don't know whether his books are horror or thriller. I just know that they're damn good, most of them. And so, you know, I got about, I don't know, maybe 70 of his books over there. Love me some Dean Koontz. Number 6. We're already to number 6. That goes to my British fellow Clive Barker. Man, this guy, of all the guys on the list, this guy might be the most gruesome. I mean, his stuff is dark. When you get into it, his stuff is dark. But I love his big, thick books. I've got all of his stuff. Clive Barker as just a poet. He's the horror poet. I just made that up. I don't know if he is that or not, but his words are like poetry, is what I'm saying. His gruesome descriptions are like poetry. He's the poet of horror writers, at least the ones on my list. Peter Straub, coming in at number 5. Peter Straub. I like this guy a lot. I mean, this guy reminds me quite a bit of Stephen King, who may or may not be on my list. We'll see. But Peter Straub, I like Peter Straub's stuff a lot too. You know, he's not writing as much anymore in his old age, so we're not getting a lot of production out of Peter Straub lately. But man, when he was in the late 80s, early 90s, when he was on his game, there was nobody better. And that's when I started collecting Peter Straub. Number 4 on my list, and this is going to be probably the big surprise of the list. But that is my good friend, Charles DeLint. Now, a lot of people would say, well, I don't know if Charles DeLint is necessarily writing horror novels, but I think he is. When I first started collecting Charles DeLint novels, the only place you could find these was in the horror novel section. Now, another thing about Charles DeLint is he is also one of my good friends, and he also helped me in my own writing career by kind of tutoring me early on when I was a writer and letting me know what I was doing right and wrong. But anyway, he has signed my books too, as you can see over here. But Charles DeLint, if you're unfamiliar with him, he is kind of like horror PG rated horror, kind of like a horror for adults, but really sort of PG, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer type horror, where it's all of his stories are set in the town of Newford, which is this sort of made up town full of a lot of mysticism, mystery, folklore, and creatures that haunt the night, as it were. I love Charles DeLint's work. You all should love it too. You should start buying his stuff because his stuff is great. My number 3 favorite horror writer of all time, Mr. Dan Simmons. These are 2 of the greatest books ever written. In fact, The Terror may or may not have landed on my top 20 favorite novels of all time. I think it did. It might have. But anyway, Carrie and Comfort, if you want to read one of the best vampire novels of all time, pick up Carrie and Comfort. It is big, it is fat, it's juicy, and you will never look at vampires the same, because this guy writes some dope, unique fucking vampires. And then The Terror, set up in the North Pole, a ship stuck in the ice and a monster terrorizing the ship. Oh, I was glued to this for 2 days straight. My number 2 favorite horror novelist of all time, Robert Mccammon. That's right. This guy, not only is he one of my favorite horror writers of all time, but he's in my top 5 favorite writers of all time. He's that good. This guy writes classic books. I mean, this Boy's Life book, it can actually be found in the classics section of your local Barnes & Noble. I have also met Robert Mccammon a few times, and he has signed all of his books to me also. So like I said, I'll name drop like a motherfucker. I really will. And anybody that I meet and I get their signature, I will show it to you, because I always promote you going out and seeking out your favorite authors and getting them to sign your books, so your book selection just sparkles like mine does. Anyway, Swan Song, a great, great post-apocalyptical horror novel, was voted by, I think, NPR as one of the greatest American novels ever written. And then this one should also be on that list of greatest. And this one you can find in the classic section. Just great horror novels by Robert Mccammon. And I think none of you will be surprised by my number one choice. And that is Mr. Stephen King. The greatest horror writer ever. Undisputed heavyweight champ of horror. He is just so fucking awesome. I can't even stand it. That's how much I like this guy. Not only is he my favorite horror writer of all time, he is my favorite writer of all time. If you watched my video on my top 10 favorite novelists of all time. So there we go, folks. My list of top 10 favorite horror writers of all time. Go out and get the books of these authors. You will not regret it. Each one of them is fantastic.